Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Final Trade. I posted a video about 2 weeks ago about how underpriced Baldur's Gate draft boxes were, how much inverted EV there was in them, and got a lot of responses on it. Now, I wanted to address some of them today. So, first off, the site uses market price instead of market low. Yes, so I was using mtgboxsim.com to do essentially a Monte Carlo simulation of box prices. And what Monte Carlo simulation is where you parameterize a system with a whole bunch of variables that can be drawn on, is what we call it. And what that means is, well, let's say you're doing a aircraft simulation and you're not sure what the temperature will be the day that you're going to fly that aircraft or perform that thing. And so instead, what you do is you say, well, I think it'll be about 70 degrees, but it could be plus or minus 5 degrees. And so what you'll do is a Gaussian distribution with the average at 70 and plus or minus 5 are the 3 sigma maximums. And then you'll draw a temperature between there for each case. And you'll have all kinds of variables parameterized like that. And you'll run hundreds or thousands or sometimes millions of simulations, and you find the average results as you draw across all of those variables. And that's what MTG Box Sim does, except what it's drawing on is all the possible cards that can show up in each slot in a booster box. And so the person says that the prices that mtgboxsim.com uses to compute the values of the boxes are market price on TCG Player and not market low. And so I will tell you, I am a small-time nobody seller on TCG Player. I buy boxes to break open when there is extreme inverted EV. I have a very relatively small inventory. I don't do many transactions, but I am profitable and I never sell a single card at market low. Very few cards on TCG Player transact at market low. And the reason for that is the cart optimizer. And so what the shopping cart optimizer does on TCG Player is it gets you the lowest overall price, not of cards, but of cards and shipping. And so, for example, it might split your order up across 2 different dealers. And you might end up paying 2 different shipping charges, but it might be worth it to pay 2 different shipping charges if the cards are cheaper. Or sometimes it might be worth paying more for the card, but less on shipping. Because if you're already buying one card from me and I also have another card that you would like that's in your shopping cart when you run the optimizer, then it may say, hey, it's cheapest to just go ahead and buy that from Craig, even though he is not the market low price. So it is probably in reality kind of conservative to use market price instead of market low, because what people who are members of the direct program will say often is that they're able to sell a little above market price because the kind of efficiencies on shipping that the direct program gives you means that buyers will use it in order to get their orders fulfilled and get all the cards they want and still pay less money overall, even though they're paying above market price on individual cards. So it's not a big deal that mtgboxsim.com uses market price instead of market low. It's a good, reasonable amount. You know, you're never paying exactly market price. You're never always paying above it, always below it. You're never paying market low. You know, it's all over the place. But again, when we do mathematical models of things, we have to pick something, you know, and no assumption is perfect. And so just choosing market price is probably good enough. It's the least bad option. The next one, somebody said the site includes cards that don't actually come in the Baldur's Gate draft boxes. And yes, it does. And this is good. You should be trying to see these things through. I opened 17 of these boxes last summer to sell for singles. They've done very well. And I have a very good familiarization with what cards are in the set. And so when I click on MTG Box Sim and I generate another box again and again and again, and I scroll through the first, say, 12 cards, because that's really what mostly matters to the value of the box is the first couple, since they're listed in descending order of value. And sometimes I will see cards I don't recognize because they are incorrectly included on MTG Box Sim. And yes, MTG Box Sim, one, they're trying to basically make money off of referral links. If you click card from their site, it takes you to TCG Player or Card Kingdom with a referral link. That's how they make money. So they're not, making a lot of money off of accuracy of their models. And two, I've noticed it before, specifically with Unfinity draft boxes. They had those, was it the full art, like Galaxy foils or something like that? I forget what they were called. But they were cards that only came in the box topper, and they had incorrectly put those as just regular lands that you could get in booster packs. And so the site was generating EVs for Unfinity draft boxes at like, $150 to $200 regularly, when they were selling for like $70 on the market for the sealed box. And so, yes, there are errors in the box generation. Now, what you have to analyze and ask yourself is, do the errors matter to the overall conclusion of the analysis? Is it a quantitative or a qualitative difference to what we're figuring out here? And quantitatively, yes, every error matters. Because even if it's only got one card in there in the pool that it will generate these randomized simulated boxes from that isn't in the real boxes, yes, that makes a quantitative difference to the exact expected dollar value of busting down one of those boxes. But does it qualitatively matter to, is this a worthwhile pursuit? And so specifically, this person pointed out the extended art legendary backgrounds. I believe there were only 4 of those. For some reason, they didn't do the entire 5-color cycle. Only 4 of the legendary backgrounds got extended art versions, I think. I went and looked them up individually. Folk Hero has a value in the legendary, in the extended art background version of $7. In the regular treatment, it's $1. Haunted one has a value of $5 in the extended, compared to a value of the regular version of $2. And the Archaeologist, he had a value of $8 in the extended compared to $4. So every, say, 2 or 3 or maybe 4 boxes that you simulate on there, you'll see one of those 3 cards that are valuable and should not be included on there. Now, we're talking about differences of $3, $4, $6 over every couple of boxes one of those appears. And so what you might say is that might make a difference of $1 to $2 in the overall EV of the box that it's overestimating by, which ultimately, qualitatively, does not change the conclusion of the analysis. So it's still worthwhile. There's still inverted EV. And yes, those cards are not actually in the real boxes you would physically open, but it's not enough of a difference to matter. Also, the person said that they suspected, though they essentially had no data, they suspected that it's possible that the site was generating the wrong rate of rare legendary backgrounds. And so apparently it's a common, uncommon, rare slot of legendary backgrounds, and the person said that the rare rate was 1 in 12 within that slot, and that he suspects they may not be generating that rare at the correct 1 in 12 frequency. And okay, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. None of us has any data on that. But the most valuable of those rare legendary backgrounds is 20 cents. So again, quantitatively, doesn't matter. Third thing, track printing, mapping, and variability. So several people pointed out that when they click the simulate button on MTG Box Sim, they would see basically ludicrous boxes, things with like, say, 3 ancient copper dragons in one box. And yes, you probably will never open a box of Baldur's Gate draft that has 3 ancient copper dragons in it. Now, the way you get around that, and the way you get around many sins and statistics, is you increase your sample size. And so when you simulate 100 boxes and you take the average, it smooths out that mapping variability. And so you can imagine that if we took 100 real boxes of Commander Legends draft and we opened them all, we could just put them into 100 piles on the table, and we could say, now each one of these piles has the correct distribution of common, uncommon, rare, and mythic, and legendaries and non-legendaries and all these things. And we could, fake together some boxes, some pretend theoretical boxes that had 3 ancient copper dragons in them. But overall, what we would have gotten out of all those physical real cards is just some number of ancient copper dragons. And that's why you do Monte Carlo simulations, is that weird, highly variable edge cases get smoothed out. because you're taking huge sample sizes. And so, yes, other boxes you might generate may have 5 or 6 reflecting pools in them, which you would never expect to get in a real box. But then you might simulate a whole bunch more boxes, and you might go 8, 10, 12 boxes without any reflecting pools, which for just a rare land, you would not expect to go that many boxes very often in reality, opening physical real boxes and not get reflecting pools. And so those kind of things, like for the complaints about track printing, mapping, variability, all of those are fixed by taking high numbers of samples and averaging them together. And again, it's important that you average them together. And I'll come back to that on this very next point, which is Craig did not eliminate the outliers. And again, because we're averaging together, it doesn't matter. Now, if we were trying to draw a distribution of what the values of Baldur's Gate draft boxes are, then you would need to eliminate outliers, because what you see when you take a distribution of box values, the value of the entire box, is it looks something like this. Okay, so it has a much shorter tail on the left side than the right side, and that kind of intuitively makes sense, because you will always have, say, in a Baldur's Gate draft box, 480 cards, and even if somehow you engineered the theoretical worst possible box, you'd still have 480 cards that each have 1, 2, 3 cents of value each. So I mean, the very worst you could do is probably like $10, $12 as the value of the worst possible engineered box. But out on the right hand side, you might get a box with an ancient copper dragon and an ancient silver dragon and some other good hitters, a bunch of archivists and other things. And you may fall way out here. Now it's much less common and it happens less often, and that's why this tail gets narrower, but it goes further out there. And so you don't eliminate the outliers when you are averaging, though, again, because the large sample size smooths everything out, the variability is toned down, and it's atoned for because you're averaging. Okay, but if you were drawing a distribution, then that simulated box with 3 ancient copper dragons that sits way out here, yeah, that box doesn't exist in reality. So if we were trying to draw the distribution, we would cut out outliers. But when we're taking the averages of the values, no, you keep them in there, because for very large sample sizes, those are valid points. You don't cut them out. Somebody complained, or a couple people complained, about hidden rarities. Now, okay, hidden rarities have a kind of difficult history. In the olden days, WotC told us that they used, and they really weren't hidden rarities because WotC told us they used them, but basically they would have things like Uncommon 1 and Uncommon 2. I forget if they ever had a Rare 1 and Rare 2, but what it meant was that a particular card would appear 1 or 2 times on the print sheets. And the reason they did that is because the set size was not compatible with the 11 by 11 print sheets, 11 cards high and 11 cards wide. And so to fill the sheets, they would give some cards an extra slot on the sheet. And so even though they were, say, uncommons, they were twice as common as other uncommons. And so there is always speculation that they still do that, or that they print extra sheets, or that some cards don't get used, or by some method, not all rares are equally rare, not all mythics are equally rare, and so on. Now, I've never seen any good data. If somebody can point me to a good study with data that proves this, or an admission from someone at WotC or something, please. But I have never yet seen any good data. I've seen lots of speculation, and of course, Rudy will often say, well, I opened a lot of Commander Legends in the past, and Jeweled Lotus was hard to get. Okay? I mean, the plural of anecdote is not data. So if somebody has tons of data on, say, you've opened 100 of the same box of something, and you had all the data on every card you pulled, yeah, you could send that to me, and I could do the analysis on it, and we could figure out if there are any hidden rarities in there. We could figure out what the variability should be, what it actually looks like, and whether that implies with enough statistical certainty that there are hidden rarities. But essentially, until I see that, and again, it may exist and I've just never seen it, but until I see it, hidden rarities are just kind of like a red herring. Maybe they're real, maybe they're not. Specific to Baldur's Gate draft boxes, though, like I said, last summer I opened 17 of these boxes. From the data WotC gives us about slots and what's in them, different rarities, etc., I should have expected about 62 total foil and non-foil, non-legendary mythics out of 17 boxes. Now, there are 17 non-legendary mythics in the expansion. I think, somebody correct me, but I think those are the 5 dragons: Baldur, Battle Angels of Tyr, Blood Money, Bramble Sovereign, Elminister, Simulacrum, Font of Magic, Legion Loyalty, Majestic Genesis, Nautiloid Ship, Pact Weapon, Storm King's Thunder, and Vexing Puzzle Box. I think those are the 17 non-legendary mythics. Okay? So there's 17. 5 out of those 17 are dragons. I should have expected to get 62 mythics. And so 5 out of the 17 times 62, I should have expected to get 17.75 dragons out of 17 boxes. I got 21. Now, what does that mean? 21 is within reasonable variability that maybe I just got lucky and I just pulled more than the average. On average, I should have gotten 17.75. But, how many sigma to the right was I? Was I 1 sigma, 2 sigma, 3 sigma? I don't have enough data points. I'd have to find more people who each also opened 17 draft boxes and counted how many ancient dragons they had. But if anything, it would weakly imply that the variability of dragons in the mythic slot is the same as other mythics, or if anything, it would weakly imply that they are more common as mythics than other mythics. So, again, to the point of hidden rarities, just that one little data point of the dragons and the number of boxes I open is not a smoking gun that, well, there's hidden rarity and the dragons are more rare. I think, if anything, it very weakly implies that the dragons are as rare in the mythic slot as anything else. And lastly, that's a lot of work to do for X dollars, depending on what assumptions you make on the model that I showed on the previous video. It came out to something like $27 or $25 of profit on every box. If you've never sold singles before, if you're not set up with it, if you don't have an inventory of sleeves and shipping shields and team bags and stamps and envelopes, and you don't have a workflow set up and you don't understand how the system works, then the idea of buying 1 box of Baldur's Gate so you can make $27 after enough work, you should not do that. Now, at the far other extreme of the spectrum, if you own a card store, you regularly bust boxes every day, you have multi-million card inventory, you're doing hundreds of transactions on TCG Player a day, you have people working for you, you have highly efficient sorting, picking, packing, shipping systems set up, and you can do the volume, then it is actually a pretty profitable part of a business. And so it depends on where you are in there. To some people, the idea of buying 40 or 50 or 100 Baldur's Gate draft boxes, shoving them through their card sorting robot, listing them on TCG Player, and then slowly selling them over many months or years, it's fine. It's part of their business, and there's a long tail of profit on that out in the future. So it completely depends on where you are as a business. So if you're just a casual observer looking at this and you say, man, that's $27 to do all that work, that stinks. But you also have to realize there are economies of scale here. Now, sorting has no economies of scale. If you go to sort more cards, you don't achieve any type of advantage, whether you're using a robot or not. Sorting 10 boxes takes 10 times as long as sorting 1 box. But when it comes to picking orders, once you get the orders, there is a very slight economy of scale as your operation and your inventory gets bigger, because you're more likely to be selling 4 sets of cards. And so once you dig through your inventory and you find the card, a lot more often you'll pull out 4 copies of it because you have more copies of the card instead of just 1 copy. If you have a tiny inventory, because you only opened one box of something. As far as making sales, again, your economy of scale is actually very favorable on making sales as your inventory goes up, because the cart optimizer will accurately identify you as being the cheapest way for somebody to get some subset of their order, because you have multiple cards they desire that fit the criteria they've put into the cart optimizer, and they can get them cheapest through you. And so you will get additional sales for more and more cards as your order gets bigger. And that's one of the biggest scaling advantages of having a large inventory to sell on TCG Player. As far as packing the order physically, putting it in a sleeve and a shipping shield and on and on and on into the envelope to the post office, you do get some economies of scale. I mean, one trip to the post office takes all your orders, whether you have 1 or 1,000 for the day. Packing the orders gets you a slight economy of scale, because if you're selling on average 8 cards in an order instead of 1, that's a lot fewer envelopes you have to seal, a lot fewer stamps to apply, and on and on. And so it does become a better, smoother, more efficient operation as it gets bigger. So don't think of it strictly from your standpoint. Try to imagine how other people doing this at different scale of business would do it. So to conclude, I guess, you have to make conservative assumptions when you have more uncertainty. When you're building a math model for something, you're trying to simulate something to figure out what will happen, the more uncertainty you have, the more conservatism you have to build into your assumptions. So make sure you do that. And like with my original model that I showed on the first video, I had that under $1 card capture rate. I set that at 20%. I think that's probably pretty conservative. On the other hand, I had the fee rate, which I set at 22%, because I've actually measured my real fee rate on TCG Player. So there's no uncertainty in that number. So be sure you make conservative assumptions. And I've spent most of my career as an engineer doing simulation, data analysis, this exact kind of stuff, Monte Carlo simulations, error budgeting, and I've done it on all kinds of different interesting real world things, all the way up to 11-figure aircraft programs where the stakes are high, but there's a lot of money to spend building very good models, very good simulations, and integrating real world data into them. And something that we say in the simulation world is all models are wrong and some are useful. And so keep that in mind. Just because you find some small quantitative problem with a model doesn't mean that the whole model needs to be thrown out. And I think people will fall back on garbage in, garbage out way too easily, and they'll identify one thing that they see as that tiny little input to the model. That one little input was a piece of garbage, therefore the entire output is garbage, and that's not how it works. It comes down to uncertainties, error budgeting, and figuring out what can we rely on as the output from this model based on how good the inputs are, how certain we are, and what the stakes are. So keep those kinds of things in mind. Thanks to everyone who makes this content possible, especially those who support me on Patreon. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Join me on Final Trade.